If you would, go ahead and be turning over to 1 Samuel 24. While you're doing that, you might notice in your bulletin that I got really prideful about the Atlanta Braves. And so in your first one, when it says Detroit is not an option, it just comes to show you how hard the Lord can humble you sometimes. I wrote that right after the Braves had won, and I was feeling really good about us, and then we lost the next two. And so that's just another example of how the good Lord will humble us whenever we start thinking like that. So 1 Samuel chapter 24 is where we're going to be coming from today. And while we're turning over there, I want you to imagine whether or not you went to church camp or another kind of camp, baseball or basketball or chess or, basket weaving, whatever kind of camp you went to. You always had that one kid who was just really mean, right? Whenever he was probably like an older kid, and he really just messed with you and wouldn't let it go. And if you don't know about that kid, you may have been that kid. And so we'll pray for you too. But imagine that you're not the kid, and imagine you're at a camp and you're there for a week, and you got this kid who's just bugging you, man, and terrorizing you all week. Every time you go to the shower, he's taking your clothes. Every time you walk out of your cabin, he's dousing you with water. Every time you go and you're trying to flirt with your 10-year-old camp crush or something, he's just messing with you and messing with her, and it's just driving you up the wall. Well, a nuance about this guy is he has not showered all week. And your buddies see him go up to the bathhouse, and they say, hey, this is your chance. He's going to shower. This is your chance. You can go in there. You're going to take his clothes. You are going to take his towels. You're going to turn the hot water off on him. I've got ice water for you right here. We can pour it on him while he's in there. Man, this is the moment. And so you walk up to the bathhouse, and you and your buddies are all hyped up. And you walk in there, and you come out with one of his dirty socks, and that's it. And that's what this story in 1 Samuel that we're going to read about is a lot like. So we're going to start off reading in verse 4. So in this story, we have Saul is hunting down the next king of Israel, and he's got 3,000 men doing it. And so David and his men are hiding in caves. And it just so happens that Saul goes in to relieve himself, go to the restroom, where David and his men are hiding out. And so David's men go and get David, and they say this to him. We're going to start off in verse 4. And the men of David said to him, here is the day of which the Lord said to you, behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seemed good to you. Now, since we've just read the whole thing, we know this doesn't really happen. He doesn't go and get after him. But weren't the men of David justified in saying this? I don't know if I really like how they framed it, saying, hey, this is what the Lord said. I don't know if they have the authority for that, but weren't they justified in saying, hey, this guy has taken multiple attempts at your life. We're out here living in caves. We've been on the run for a really long time. This is your moment. This is when you can go and you can take the throne that is rightfully yours next. God's even told you it's yours next. And so this is your moment, man. Let's go get him. And David responds, and we read the rest of verse 4. David then arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. This would make so much sense for this to be the moment that he goes and he cuts off Saul's head, takes it out to the 3,000 men, goes back to the throne room of Israel, and calls it a day. This is a perfect ending for 1 Samuel, and then we can move on into 2 Samuel and go into the reign of David. This would be perfect. It's what we want to see in your real life. It's what we want to see in our movies. It's what we want to see in our books. This is the perfect kind of ending. The bad guy gets got, right? The good guy gets to go back to the throne room and take everything. That's the perfect ending. But that's not the way that David does it. And he just cuts off a little piece of his robe, and we find his reasoning down in verse 6. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed. He said, Saul is the plan of God right now. But Saul, if it's you and I, and we're thinking about this, we think, but Saul, he's evil. He's quite irresponsible. He's got a whole country to run, and he's coming after the next guy. He's erratic. And David says to his men, yeah, that's the plan of God right now. That's what God has in store right now for us. And so I'm not going to put my hand against that. I'm not going to mess with that because that's God's plan. And me, if I'm in this situation, which I've never been in any situation like this, and so let's dumb it down a lot to scale. And let's say I'm in a situation where I feel like I've been wronged or I've been in some kind of conflict with somebody. And I go away from these situations and I'm driving down the road thinking of all like the good things I could have said to them. You know, just the things that I could have really gotten them. Maybe they were really funny. Maybe I wish I was a little more hurtful. But maybe I'm the only one who's a horrible person like this. But you drive away from these situations thinking, man, I could have said this. And if I get another opportunity, I'm going to be more hurtful. Or I'm going to be funnier about this. And I'm going to say this. And I'm going to do what I call defending myself a little bit better. But we see that David doesn't do this either. David, he has another opportunity in 1 Samuel 26, when Saul is hunting him again. And he has the opportunity to kill Saul in his sleep, and he doesn't do it. For the same reason, he implores to his men, Saul is the plan of God right now. As crazy as that might seem to us, Saul is the plan of God right now. And so David says, I'm not going to put my hand against Saul. David's worldview says that he's not going to go against the plan of the Lord, even if he doesn't understand it, and if it makes no sense. But don't you think that David had plans too? I mean, if you're the next guy up and you see how your I guess the word is predecessor, right? Did I use that right? Your predecessor is the guy before you is running the country, and you're thinking, well, if I was running the country, I wouldn't be out here with 3,000 men hunting down one dude that's going to run the country after me. He's got to have plans like for the country. In the very least, his plans probably don't include him sleeping in caves and being on the run for his life all the time. So it's fair to think that David had plans, but he implores to his men over and over, that's not God's plans right now, though. That might make sense to us, but that's just not God's plans right now. So you fast forward years and years later, and Saul finally dies, and the throne is finally David's, and David's the new king of Israel. Now, in this time, you pretty much have a house cleaning when a new regime takes over, right? You have all the old family, all the people who might be loyal to the old regime, they're gone. They're either killed or ousted or banished at least, but there's no way they're still in the castle, and probably a not very good likelihood they're still in the kingdom. And this is going to cause David so many issues with his next decision. I mean, strategically, it's not the right move. Politically, it's certainly not the right move. But David's not operating from that point of view. He's not operating from that. So he didn't banish. Instead, he goes the complete opposite. We're going to turn over to 2 Samuel and see what he does with Saul's grandson. 2 Samuel chapter 9. Second Samuel chapter 9, we're going to start in verse 3 and read 6 and 7. And the king said, "Is there still not someone in the house of Saul that I may show kindness to him?" And Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in his feet." And skip on down to verse 6. And Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David, fell on his face, and paid homage, and David said, "Mephibosheth." And he answered, "Behold, I am your servant." David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan, and I will restore to you all the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always." And I'm thinking, what? This guy's grandfather has just been hunting you down for years. He's been coming after you. He has to have a lot of power still in the kingdom. I'm thinking, what are you doing? If I'm one of David's advisors, I'm resigning right here. I'm done. I'm not taking it anymore because this makes zero sense strategically. And the reason that it doesn't make any sense to us is because David's thinking in a way that doesn't make sense strategically. It doesn't always make sense maybe in this world. But David is a follower of God, and that's the worldview that he's coming from. Long before being a Christian was ever a thing, David's a follower of God. Therefore, he expects the trials. He operates from a different point of view. He operates in a way that makes him deny himself, deny his emotions as a decision maker, and follows after God. I heard this guy on a talk show that I listened to. He says this all the time. He says, I think that Christians have forgotten, or maybe they never really knew what it's like to be a follower of God and what the difference is between being a Christian and being a follower of God. He says it like this. He says, you may find Christians who call themselves Christians and are not followers of God, but you're not going to find any followers of God who aren't Christians. There's definitely a distinct difference. And so David may not have been a Christian, but he was indeed a follower of God. And I think we get in this trap sometimes of thinking that being a Christian is all that God has to offer for us. And then we wait for heaven. And that's just simply not the case. You see, being a follower of God entails all the opportunities that God has for you. It has all the growth opportunities, all the trials that maybe Paul never would have gotten if he was baptized and showed up and then not really took it any more seriously than that. You know, being a follower of God, it entails so many more opportunities for you. And, you know, when we think about how we're going to approach God, how we're going to approach God and use him in our day-to-day lives, this is it, because this is what your worldview is going to be off of. What's important to God has got to be important to you. And being a follower of God is how we go after that. It's how we seek out God. It's how we seek out what he wants and make decisions based off that point. Because if we're just Christians and if we just show up here because it's the Christian thing to do, I'll see you in heaven, but God has designed us to be followers of him. He hadn't just designed us to be someone who shows up. He designed us to be someone who flourishes when we are going after him, chasing after him in our day-to-day lives and operating from his worldview. And so David may not have been a Christian, but he was indeed a follower of God. He looked at the world the way that God looks at it. You know, what's best for God's kingdom, that's what he did. And that's what's best for us too. When he was at his best, he was showing grace. He was showing a lot of mercy. He was putting what God wants above everything else. And that's when he was at his best. He broke out of his flesh and what makes sense to him by following after God and looking at the world the way that God looks at it. Got a story about my incredible wife, Emma, who and y'all knew that she was awesome way before I ever knew her. But one of the awesome things about her is that she can get toothpaste out of just about any toothpaste tube. And I know it's incredible, isn't it? Yeah, and so a few weeks into us being married, I threw away this toothpaste tube. And I didn't think anything of it because I had done the little thing where you roll it all up. I had put it up against the counter and pushed. And I'd done all the things that I knew to do to get toothpaste out. And so I threw away the tube because that's what people do. And so I come back that night to brush my teeth and the tube's back. And I thought, well, that's odd. I thought I threw it away, but I'm wrong about something all the time. So I just thought, well, that's it. And so I used the new tube because I didn't think it had anything in it, threw it away again. Well, the next morning, it's back. And not only is it back, Emma walks up and she uses it, the audacity. And I thought she was just messing with me. And so it's, just saying, I can get more out of this and all this. Well, not only does she use it that time, she uses it 5 more times before I said anything to her. I was thinking she has to be putting something back in it. Maybe she's cutting off the end. And maybe she's putting, I didn't know what she was doing. But she wasn't messing with me. She wasn't playing any tricks. She was just getting the value out of this toothpaste tube that I could not see any value in, nor could I much less could get any value out of. And on a much larger scale, I think David does this for Mephibosheth. And on a even larger scale than that, that's what Christ does for us. And we see this story of Mephibosheth, and we see a lot of grace. But really, it's all about Jesus. The whole Bible, it all revolves around Jesus. This whole earth before, the New Testament was ever written, before he ever was born and stepped foot on this earth, he was being revolved around. His whole existence was revolving around Christ and our redemption, our relationship with God. And so we were learning about how to be followers of him far before being a Christian was ever a thing. David had the sentiment, the meaning of Luke 9:23 on his heart when he denied himself and took up a metaphoric cross at that point and followed after God. And so when God said, vengeance is mine, he said, yes, Lord. When God said, you're going to have to go through a little bit of trouble before you're able to receive your glorification, he went and hid in caves and still sought after the will of God. When God said that it was time to show grace, he showed it and showed it abundantly to Mephibosheth. And really, I would love to end this sermon and say, let's be like David. And I would love to tell you that I find myself more in David than Mephibosheth, but I've got to tell you, I'm a lot more like the crippled guy, and I think that you are too, if you think about it. And not because, and this is what we're not about to do. We're not about to go into how terrible we are and just how awful we are and end it on that, because that would just be a terrible way to send you into your Sunday afternoon. And so we're not going to just go in and talk about all the sin that we have, and these are all real things. These are all realities, right? But I'm more like Mephibosheth because let's look at what Mephibosheth was in his state. You see, when Mephibosheth was a cripple, an enemy of the king, helpless, and having no right to be in the presence of the king, David looked at him and gave him a seat at the table for the rest of his life. And my existence is this: when I was in opposition to God, when I was against God, when I was helpless with my sin and had no right to be in a relationship with the one true God, God sent his son, and he sent him for me while I was still in opposition to him, living in sin, and he bared with me and saved me anyway. The beautiful thing, Romans 5:9, it says, while we were still sinners, Christ came and he died for us. He saved us in that way. And I don't think we get what a big deal being in opposition to God is. I was in opposition to God. We were enemies of the king. We were against what he was all about. Everything about him is holy, and we were nothing of that. We couldn't do anything to get there. We were absolutely impure. We were absolutely unholy, and these are big, big deals to God because, believe it or not, sin is incredibly serious. And sin, as we see in the Bible all the time, has consequences. Sin has consequences. It's incredibly serious. And while we were in that sin, while most of the world was in that sin in the present day, he sent his son and died for you and me and for everyone else that we see that we don't value because, we may be different from them in our religion, or we may be different from them in somewhere else. God looks at that person and says, yeah, I value them. I came for them. I want that relationship with him. While we were still sinners, he longed for a relationship with us. He longed for a relationship with his enemy. And that's so cool because we were but dirty rags. We were but empty toothpaste tubes, if you will. We're worthless in our sin. And God looked at us and he called us loved. He looked at us. He called us redeemed. He looked at us and he said, that is a child of the king right there. And he gave himself up for us. David, he showed us the difference between what being someone who knows who God is and being a follower of God. Christ shows us the way to follow him, and now all he's asked us to do is follow him. We are called to identify what's important to God and make that what's important to us. Looking at the world the way that God looks at it, looking at life the way that God looks at it, looking at human life the way that God looks at it. Just being able to see what God is all about and being about that. Not just showing up here and having a great time and conversating, but tomorrow and the next day. Just being all about what God's all about, because that's how we take up our cross and we follow him. And don't hear me say it's going to be a prosperity gospel, because it's not. I mean, David was following after God, and he was in caves. I think we'll have it a little better here. But we have to take up our cross and we have to follow after him and make what's important to him important to us. Because he has found value in us, something that really should have been thrown away. And he said, hey, I want a relationship with that person. And that's why we follow after him. You know, if you are struggling in a relationship this morning, if you need to start a relationship this morning, I know that we can help you out. If you need anything, please come as we stand and sing.